welcome to the Heroes Wellness Podcast. Today we're talking with some old friends from the SF Trust. We're going to be talking about the programs that they're doing specifically tailored to Army Special Forces community, but things that will resonate with the HWC community at large. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And Jodi and Cameron, thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys again. It's been a while, and I know you guys have been working on some great programs, and one of your signature programs being Beyond the Battlefield, and we'll get to that. Jodi, Cameron, whoever wants to go first, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the nonprofit sector and how you ended up with the Special Forces Trust.
That's a loaded question, right?
That's a lot of ground, right, Jodi?
That is. I'll say I got involved. Well, first of all, I'm Jodi. It's nice to meet everyone. And thank you so much, Fred, for having us. This is such a great opportunity. So I think for me, it wasn't like this big dramatic moment that got me involved in the nonprofit space. It was like 1,000 small ones, I guess I would say. But I think there is one moment in time that really kind of prepped me for the nonprofit space. And that was my family. We were prepping for, I think it was probably deployment number 4 or 5. And the team leadership had made a retreat mandatory for my husband and I to attend, and my daughter, just before they would leave, as they always did, right? It was like the very last weekend that we had together. So quite honestly, I was a little angry. I was a little bit more angry just because that was like the last weekend before he left. And so when I went begrudgingly. When I got there, the content was all about the warrior, right? Nothing about the families at all. And so that made my anger just a little bit more intense. But being honest, and I know, right? The intention, I think, of that meeting, though, was to kind of prepare us with the paperwork, right? The dreaded paperwork. And so we got through that. And in doing the paperwork, in talking to some of the other spouses, I got to know them and kind of forged a little bit of a relationship with them, bonded over like being upset about being there and, how are you preparing for the deployment, that kind of thing. Turns out those ladies that I met that weekend, I could call that small group of ladies right now and they'd be like, what do you need? I'm there for you. And honestly, I do the same for them. So, and that's been over 30 years ago. And it dawned on me in that moment that it was like, hey, they're doing a lot for prepping the warriors, but the families need that same kind of prep. And so that's kind of what led me to the nonprofit space. Eventually, it started off with contracting, but eventually it would be nonprofit.
Yeah. Well, and we should mention that Jodi is in fact the executive director of the Special Forces Trust. So yeah, she's
CEO now.
Oh, CEO as well. Wow, you deserve that title, Jodi, with all that you do for the trust. And I know they're in the community truly appreciate what you're doing. And so then from working in the field, was that kind of your initial push into the trust?
Yeah. Honestly, it was. I can't take all the credit myself. I worked for a contractor through BUMED. It was funded through BUMED. And I learned a lot through that contractor. The whole focus was the family. And of course, it spoke to me because I was living that lifestyle. And I knew exactly what needed to happen. I knew what I needed as a family member. And so, raising children in that lifestyle is really, really tough. So between, just making sure that I was cared for mentally, not just physically, like mentally and emotionally, that my kids were as well. This was all in the height of the 20-year war. So we were like probably 7 to 8 years into that war. And it was very obvious that, hey, the command leadership were starting to realize like, we need to take care of these families so that our guys can concentrate on the mission and really put their focus forward. Because before that, it was like, oh, you have a family? Well, they need to stay at home, right? Like you remember those days.
Yeah, I know. I'm laughing not because I think it's funny, but because I know the story, right? I've been been part of the story. So yeah,
yes,
back some not so pleasant memories.
That's exactly right.
Of the disregard, and in a lot of ways, the unpreparedness of the command to support the families. And I know that's where sort of mettle and moxie came from, right?
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Yeah. That resilience is key.
So we'll jump to Cameron.
So I'm Cameron Davis. I am actually now our Chief Marketing Officer. So up until a couple weeks ago, I was our Chief Programs Officer. And Metal and Moxie has been a huge part of my journey with the trust. I worked with Jodi before coming on board here with this organization and worked that BMed contract. When I came on board with her, it was really about the end user. You know, you kind of started creating and cultivating these relationships with these families, and it was just so fulfilling. And Metal and Moxie is a perfect conduit for that. Really bringing these families in, loving on them for the weekend, and providing them with some really fantastic resources to help them communicate better, sleep better, prepare better, parent better, drive their relationship better. And I think too, coming from the civilian side of things, so Jodi has the military background, but coming from the civilian background, we see the deployments, but understanding the lead up and train up to those deployments are almost equally as hard, I think, on the families and the relationships. So Metal and Moxie has become a really fantastic platform and resource for the community that we serve, I believe. So.
Awesome. All right, Cameron, so can you give us sort of a background of the Special Forces Trust, what the overall mission is, and it's more than one program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trust actually came up or began back in 2010 when 5 of our founders really got together and realized there was a lot for the service member, but the family really needed some support. So the Special Forces Charitable Trust at the time was officially founded as a 501c3 in 2011. Since then, we have, modified or updated our name to Special Forces Trust. The goal in our organization is to really support that warrior, but to also support that warrior's family and children in everything that they do. So that's what a lot of our programs have really centered around over the years. I think the need has changed definitely from when they initially started the organization to now. And then, of course, we had COVID in the middle of it too. So some of the programs that were really, helping reconnect and reunite those families kind of came to a pause. But then we kicked that back off in 2021 and got back down to business. So there's a lot of ways that the trust has supported the Special Forces community through the years. I think a lot of it was meeting them where they needed it most in the moment, making sure those families could get bedside if something happened to that service member, really trying to uplift and support different events that the commands had where they brought the families together, whether it was the trust that was hosting it or whether it was command that was hosting it. And fortunately, as we've had some really fantastic Americans supporting our organization, we've been able to broaden a lot of that support to the community over the years through Metal and Moxie and through scholarships and educational grants and even through Beyond the Battlefield, which is our newest program, but has quickly become our signature program.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's been interesting watching the evolution of the trust. As you said, it's like it formed to sort of fill gaps, right? Either places the command had, sort of traditionally maybe not put enough focus, or, because of, government funding, right? Things they couldn't pay for, things they couldn't do, and the trust sort of fell into that. And then, as you mentioned, this new program, Beyond the Battlefield, that sort of evolved as hey, maybe we're not paying enough attention to the wellness of our guys. And I think part of the reason for that evolution is also sometimes that is felt post-retirement, right? There's too much going on in the heat of, hey, I'm deploying. I'm not going to admit that there's anything wrong with me because I'm deploying. And then, after folks retire, there's sort of that, okay, now what? And sometimes that's when the stuff comes up. So.
Absolutely. I think, the topic of suicide is something that is very familiar with the SOF community as a whole, unfortunately. And we kept hearing these stories and kept hearing different conversations about the struggles to help that service member. And it really started with the service member. How do we help support them finding, care? What does that care look like? We were hearing some of the challenges that they were facing with TRICARE, with actually making or finding the time to get appointments to go see somebody, having to start the story over again because they weren't seeing the same person. And then just the worry, that worry trickles down to that family too, to the spouse and to the children. I was hearing those conversations. And, I think one of the pivotal moments was actually the passing of Andy Marquezano. It was something that, really struck Jodi, and she and I were talking. She was like, we have got to do something. But the community is struggling. I think he was number 30 that had committed suicide in that battalion alone, which is a really striking number. I really hope that I have those details accurate. But regardless, it was a pointed time where Jodi was like, we need to do something. And so we were trying to figure out, what does that look like? How can we create a program or platform and make it usable and make it accessible, and that the community wants to use it? You guys are the quiet professionals. You don't want to talk about it, even though you probably should talk about it. And there's a lot of stigma around talking about it. They want to be deployable. They want to know that their command can trust them. They want to still be a leader to their teammates and their brothers. There's a lot going on that kind of balls up and becomes a hurdle to seeking help in the first place. And we kept hearing, the stigma approach of it was, I'm not sure that I want my leadership to know. I don't know if I want that in my records yet. So our first thought process was, okay, how can we offer this and keep it up to them?
You called it a hurdle. I call it the barrier, the barriers that the command presents, right? But there's also the person themselves. For those who've seen Denzel Washington Training Day, right? It's the King Kong ain't got nothing on me. There's this unbreakable mind that we all have, right? That we all cultivate, that I can't fail. I won't fail. Like, you cannot outsuffer me, right? I can suffer more than anyone, and I can endure that. Once that mind is developed, right, to take that helmet off and set it to the side and admit that, okay, right, that guy also can't be healed.
Yeah.
Right? That guy can achieve anything, can do anything, can outsuffer anyone, but they also cannot be healed, right? For a lot of us, that's the barrier as well, to admitting to yourself without all the barriers that the command presents. And Jodi, so if you can jump in on some of the things that you saw, both from being the spouse of a special operator to the hurdles the command was putting in, and why Beyond the Battlefield was so important. And you saw this suicide and you're like, we have to do something.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That program, Beyond the Battlefield, really did come from like Heartbreak, right? And honestly, I could see different folks. Well, let me go backwards. We were at NPS during COVID, and that quiet time, that silence, allowed us a lot of time sitting on the beach, gathered among lots of MARSOC, AFSOC, SEALs, and Green Berets. So I had the whole gamut of operators sitting around a fire talking about a lot of different things. At that time, of course, mental health was on all of our minds as well, just because of the situation, right? Add on, hey, the war, what'd you do? Where'd you serve? That kind of thing. So I just sat and listened to a lot of conversations. And I would always, dip in every once in a while and ask the question, like, what keeps you from getting help? What would keep you from asking for help if you thought that you might be struggling or having some kind of an issue mentally, if you were strained in some way? And honestly, I probably had 50 or so conversations, and every single one of them fell back to that whole, I wouldn't want anybody to know. I would want privacy. I would want it to be a secret that I was asking for help. And I think that just goes back to that, hey, if I'm asking for help, I'm weak kind of mentality. And so, we all know that's not true, but that's the way that they're built. And so I knew.
Once you put that barrier around your mind that you can't fail,
that's
right, and nobody can outsuffer you, to get that off.
That's right.
To admit that there's a weakness.
So
right?
hard, right? It's like, the word suck it up, suck it up, buttercup. That's ingrained in them throughout training. So you can't really blame them for it. But I knew in that moment that there had to be some kind of mechanism where they could ask for help without anybody knowing. And so that anonymity piece just kept coming back into play. And so that's kind of where we landed. I knew that if they could get help without asking, they weren't worried about reporting. They weren't worried about, hey, my leadership knows, my team member knows, then they would ask for help. And we're seeing that that's working.
Yeah, and Jodi, critical component being this, that they can be anonymous, right?
Yes.
They can enter treatment that way. But also, can you mention some of the shortfalls
Oh,
there that
sure.
you guys are trying to fill?
Yeah, and it seems like it's TRICARE is a challenge across the board, and I think it's getting worse. To be honest with you, I'm speaking personally, just in being able to get services that I need. I can imagine, and I don't have anything that's really stressful. So imagine yourself being someone who is really struggling emotionally or mentally, and they're trying to get help. Boy, some of those challenges are just really frustrating. It's enough to put someone over the edge, honestly. And that's what we're seeing is, long waits. TRICARE won't cover mental health therapy unless it's attributed to, sexual abuse or alcoholism or drug abuse, something of that nature. That kind of tends to get the priority, especially with family members. Which is something that we just learned, by working through the issues with this program and getting us to a place where we could help the entire family. So, not only is TRICARE an issue for them, but also if they lean on the resources that are there on base, which not every base has the resources, right? It's only the larger bases. The wait time is sometimes 6 months, 8 months. And we don't have that time in some of these situations, some of these cases. So that's a frustration. And then you add on just the normal, hey, I don't want my leadership to know. I want to self-assess first. I want to make sure that I'm not, going to end up in that hey, I'm at the ledge and I'm ready to jump kind of situation. Our program is built to get to those warriors, those family members, before they even go to the edge. We're trying to get them well before that.
You guys mentioned there's this career stigma and there's a bunch of system barriers created within the different healthcare systems. But culturally, so we talked a little bit about this, cultural, like, I don't want to do that anyway, regardless of if I could, and if it had no impact on my career. How are you guys trying to address some of those cultural, barriers to folks recognizing that they may need help or becoming part of the system?
Do you want to answer that, Cameron, or do you want me to take it?
You can take it.
I think probably one of the biggest things is getting the leadership involved. HB, who works with us, former general, he shares a story that, as a general, when he asked for help, they made conditions for him. They wanted to take him around the back so people wouldn't see him going in and asking for help. And, he took it upon himself to say, no, I'm going to go through the front doors, just like the rest of the service members. And I think that, stories like that shared to leadership and letting them understand, like, hey, the guys are watching you. They're modeling their efforts after you. And if you're making it normal, it's going to be normal to them. And they're going to be more likely to just have those conversations and open up. And I think that the more conversations we can have about this and, just make it, I hate to say it, make it normal, but I mean, just make it so that it doesn't have a stigma. We all have a responsibility to get rid of that stigma. And I think that's the biggest thing we can do collectively is just always, take that route, be uncomfortable, have the conversation, and sooner or later it becomes not as uncomfortable anymore.
I want to add in there too, like, I think some of this too, to echo the continuing those conversations, at Metalmoxie, that's one of the approaches is to really try and bring some of the community back to talk to the community. Like, talk about those success stories, talk about, like, yes, they put their, neck out there and they asked for the help, and to hear the stories of the leadership that did surround those service members and their families. And when they said, hey, take your time, we support you going in and getting this help or going to get this treatment. Or here's information about a resource. Here's information about being on the battlefield. I think as much as we can bring both ends of the spectrum of the community as part of that conversation is so important and powerful, because just like you're saying, Jodi, HB is at that leadership level in that officer role. And then you have some of the enlisted guys too. They're kind of their own entities, but very much work together, seeing both sides, and the success from it has been hugely successful. Jodi, I hope that you agree with this too, the statement that, when we launched Beyond the Battlefield, where the community was to where it is now,
yes.
and even talking about it is
Very true.
just so far exceeded anything that we thought it could be at the time when we built it. It's fantastic, but there's still so much work. There's so much work and conversation to still be done.
That's right. And I think too, I'll add to this too.
Go ahead, Jodi.
There's a component of Beyond the Battlefield called side by side. And that's really like small groups of Green Berets, 6 to 12 guys who get together. They do something they've never done before. So they're a little bit vulnerable and can have some conversations, around a fire and whatnot. After they sniff each other out, of course, they always have to verify. But once they're comfortable and they're trying to, they get to know one another, them sharing the struggles that they have also helps to normalize that conversation and to make them realize, like, gosh, I'm not the only one at the team, or I'm not the only one that, asked for help. And I think that they start seeing that, hey, their team actually will rally around them if they just put it out there, like, hey, just like my arm hurts today, it's my brain hurts today, or my heart hurts today. And that team starts rallying around them. And it's honestly pretty cool to watch and be part of, because when you see that in action, it's like, wow, that's super powerful. When you see it's like true brotherhood at work.
Yeah, that's interesting, this normalizing of the conversation, because then telling the family members, letting it spread organically through the community. One of the things I've also noticed, I think that's been helpful to the process is, so when the global war on terror started, a lot of the leadership had grown up
That's true.
in a non-combat military, and their mindset was a lot different than, by now. Everyone that's a general now grew up in the G1. So all of the leaders, they've been at that small unit level in this particular conflict. So they understand the mental health challenges maybe better than our leadership did when we started this thing. Being at the middle management part in my career when the war started.
You probably know more about it than any of us.
Starting with the initial deployments, the things that we were seeing on the ground and we were asking for, there was a tremendous amount of pushback until many of us that had fought on the ground graduated to the position, and then we could intimately understand what the person asking was asking.
That's
for.
right.
So I think that's part of the cultural, or the, in your vernacular, Jodi, the sea change, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Of how we got here. And a practical question. So you mentioned a soldier presents themselves for Beyond the Battlefield, and that's 24 sessions. How does that work? And what's the follow-on to that?
Yeah, so each service member actually gets 12 sessions per that number that they pull, that identification number. And if they need more than 12, then we'll allow them to pull that number again, and there's another 12 attached to that number. So in total, 24. We never want to say no. There are situations where they need more than that. And sometimes, they're like, hey, I don't want to be anonymous anymore. I need help. I need more than therapy can give me. Can you help? And that's where that last S and SOS comes into place. We've put many, many guys through Warrior's Heart. We put them through PTSD treatments of different kinds. And we're learning every single day new treatments and services that are having great success in treating all of those different ailments. We kind of leave that last S up to the warrior. Oftentimes they know what they need and they'll tell us, hey, I found this program, or my buddy went through this program and it's something I really want to try. We never want to say no to someone if they're looking for help, because it's not a one size fits all. This treatment may work for this guy, and that treatment may not even touch their buddy's ailments. So we always try to help kind of guide them through, what's out there and what's available, and kind of see what resonates with them.
Yeah, and you mentioned one thing I want to just hit on this, so people listening to this might understand what she meant by number. So to keep the people anonymous, when someone enters the system, they're assigned a number so that nobody, even if they wanted to look through the data, could know who the service member is. They're just referred to by their number.
That's right.
And then one of the things I wanted to talk about, this is a traditional method, right? It starts with sessions of cognitive behavior therapy, traditional talk therapy. So it's not like, hey, we're throwing the woohoo at them right away. But as you mentioned, if they are treatment resistant, then you have other programs. And you mentioned a few. Can you run through what types of therapy might be available through the SF Trust at the end of, hey, I've tried cognitive behavior therapy. I'm not where I need to be. What next?
Yeah, I think honestly, it might be good to go a little bit further backwards. So, Beyond the Battlefield is a platform as a whole, but under Beyond the Battlefield, we have SOS. That, it's a well-known distress call for help. And so when we started this platform, we felt like that was a really easy thing to remember, and everybody could identify with reaching out for some help. So the first S is side by side, which Jodi spoke to about, getting those guys together, allowing them to release a little bit of energy. Maybe they're not sure if they want to talk, and then they get around and do events or do activities, and it kicks off and it allows them to release a little bit of pressure and realize, hey, that was actually kind of helpful. Yeah. Then we look at it's our one-on-one therapy, which we spoke to. You can pull an anonymous identifying number, replaces that service member's name, their spouse's name, or their children's name in our system. It connects a clinician of their choosing back to our organization for us to cover down on the cost. And then if they need the more, they can go for another 12 sessions, making it ultimately 24. That last S is our sponsored services. And that is really like the crux of, from step 1, step 2, step 3. You're talking to your peers, releasing a little bit of pressure, realize that's helpful. Let's go and actually try and dig in a little bit deeper, get a little bit, somebody who's trained to ask me some different questions and figure out is there something underlying that maybe I've just been putting down or, putting on the back burner and adding layers onto it. And then that last S is really like, okay, I need a lot more help than I'm realizing. I might have some, struggles with alcohol or maybe some other, drugs of choice, or maybe there's some serious trauma in my upbringing or what I saw when I was deployed or at any point in my life. And those resources have been really fantastic underneath our last S. And like Jodi mentioned too, a lot of the community has brought a lot of those resources to us consistently, which is fantastic. It's allowed us to partner with, Shepherd Center's Share program, Laurel Ridge, Home Base, Warrior's Heart, a lot of really fantastic names. And that's not the end all be all of those resources. The community does a really great job, I think, of finding resources and services that lift them up and meet them where they are. And I mean, I think Fred, too, and Jodi, you probably could have an aspect of this too. It's the soft community is a little bit different beast, and that's why these programs and those treatments are made. I think understanding what you guys have gone through and what the community has seen is important in understanding how to best support them with that kind of struggle is something that they realize they need to face head on.
I think one of the things that's really intriguing about the soft community is that what we're learning is that their pain, they always attribute pain to physical pain. And if it is not physical pain, it doesn't make sense to them. And pain comes in a lot of different forms. It's the emotional, it's the mental, it's complicated. And so they've been through a really complicated time. And so I think, there are a lot of therapies that are emerging that are really interesting. And some of them, some people kind of roll their eyes at different kinds of therapies. We always try to attack those or approach them with an open mind, because you just never know what's going to resonate with someone and expose whatever kind of pain it is that they're experiencing.
Yeah, Jodi, you mentioned non-traditional. And so one of our previous guests on the podcast that we had on, Matt Butler, who does, sort of natural healing through plant medicine. And one of the things that he mentioned, it goes back to something we were talking about earlier, this protective layer, right, ego, and that plant medicines have been, in his estimation, providing that ability to crack open, to peel off some of that ego and allow the person to accept and provide some neural plasticity to overcome some of these addictions and some of these other problems and engage in therapy in a more meaningful way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're learning more. And I that's interesting that that you pose it that way, kind of breaking through that ego or getting rid of the ego. I like that. I'm going to be honest with you, Fred. We are just touching on, some of the like plant medicine. Our board is split down the middle, as you can imagine, 50-50 on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Most definitely, they're not on board with rolling that out to active duty for obvious reasons, of course.
Nor would I be.
Right?
That's,
yeah.
Unfortunately, we still live in a place where if you were speaking at a conference, right, and it involved a meal or whatever, it would not be uncommon for you to look out at the audience and see multiple alcoholic beverages on every table.
100%.
Right? Totally socially acceptable. Now, however, if one person at a table stood up and said, "Hey, I just took some THC gummies," or "Hey, I'm microdosing with psilocybin," right? Those, oh my God, even though those
heads would roll.
Potentially the argument could be made.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm intrigued to learn more about the plant medicines and just what comes of those, because I think there's still a lot to learn out there for sure.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to me watching some people enter that process and come out the other side in a place to heal. So let's go back to the concept of fire. It's like, hey, come back from the big hunt and everybody's going to sit around and stare at the fire. Or we sometimes refer to the Ranger TV, right?
The Ranger TV.
You're going to stare at the fire.
That's funny.
And maybe not, because sometimes this emotional connection between men prohibits eye contact. Your friend to the side of you, can hear what you have to say. I'm assuming that was really, this side by side.
Yeah.
It was really started based on what you referred to earlier as your experience at the Naval Postgraduate School that you mentioned earlier, where you have these guys that have been through, at this point, several years of the fight, and they have a moment to pause and reflect, and they're sitting around the fire. So I'm assuming that's
exactly right. That's where it was born. Yes, 100%. That the fire's power, I swear, it's like magic. And I never really thought about it like staring into the fire like that. As a Ranger TV, I'm going to use that. I like that. But it is true. I think that the eye contact, right? It's like it normalizes like staring into that fire, and you don't have to make the eye contact. And maybe that's the magic. I don't really know. I like that. But yeah, that's kind of where it was born out of, and I kind of make fun of the guys sniffing each other out, but y'all really do that. It's like, you're right. I mean, you are.
We're essentially dogs. We're essentially dogs, right? So it's like
it's so funny to watch. It's like,
before everything else.
Where were you at this year? Oh yeah, I was here. Well, did you know this person? Because he was there. It's like there's like verification and, edification all happening at the same time. It's kind of funny. And then you can see once they're like, okay, you are who you say you are. Now I can talk. There's a lot of that goes on. It's kind of funny to watch it happen in real time. But, around that fire, that happens as well. It's like, how many deployments were, did you do, what years, what area were you at, during this time? All of that matters in those moments, in those conversations. And it's kind of a way for you all to explain your stressors or your fears or your worries or what have you, based on where you were and the timing of where you were. And so it's interesting because it's like a conversation that you all have amongst each other that no one else really gets. And it's almost like they talk about, Cameron and I have worked together for so long. They say that we finish each other's sentences. And that's definitely what happens in SOF.
Whether you call it butt sniffing, rubbing antennas,
yes,
whatever
all of it,
sort of colorful explanation that you use to explain what happens. But I think it's also one of the phenomenon that we see now happening, sort of play out on social media, right? Because to the detriment of some, because as you mentioned, I don't personally think it really matters the what of what you did. It matters how you relay it and whether it's actually authentic to who you are, right? So it's like nobody cares if, hey, you were in 72 firefights in the Helmand, vice you served at Bagram on a staff, right? Some people might, but most of the time it's about how you present it, right? So if everybody knows you were the person on staff at Bagram and you're trying to present yourself as the person who got, 6 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star V, while being in multiple firefights, and they find that out to not be true, I think that's more damaging in our community. And we see that now sort of playing out in what soft drama on
in real time.
In real time, we see, folks, because I think some people do think, I can be more legitimate by,
stretching
this story
Yes.
to more than it is.
Yeah. And those are, honestly, those are cries for help, right? They're wanting to be legitimized. They're wanting to be heard. They want to be a part of something. And they think that the way to do that is to create this persona, and these.
Ain't got nothing on me.
I know.
That's the first, right? And so it goes back to that conversation we were just having. If as long as that ego is protecting that person, you will have trouble healing them.
Yeah,
you have trouble healing them.
Very good point.
And so let's jump back to the sort of practicality of side by side where you enter. So organically, right? A bunch of guys can get together, sit around a fire, and this can sort of happen. How do you guys facilitate that as a program? What does that look like?
So it happens in a number of ways. So on our website, guys can go in and first of all, sign up for a side-by-side. They register. And at that point in time, they can give us different ideas of things to do. We've sent guys on river rafts, river rafting trips. We've sent guys on hunting trips. We've sent guys golfing. It can look a lot of different ways. We just don't want it to be on a couch, right? And it's not
away from a team room.
Or a team room. And it's not a family vacation. This is just Green Berets. None of our staff that go are ladies or anything like that. We want Green Berets there so that it's authentic, genuine, like organic conversations happening throughout the whole weekend. And the reason I say we send them on kind of like, I guess it'd be field trips, if you will, is because we want them to do something, again, that they're not good at. Maybe they've never done it before, so that they are a little bit more vulnerable and lean on one another. And that just creates that bond, right? They're learning something together, just like you guys do in training. You're constantly learning something together, teaching one another. I'm better at this than you. You're better at this than I am. So, sharing those tips and tricks, if you will, that lends to a better conversation later around that fire. And, one conversation that's genuine and real and deep is worth the whole weekend.
Yeah, for sure.
So I would say Beyond the Battlefield was born out of Andy Marcazano's death. And that happened in 2020. I just did a presentation on it. That shook me. That article really bothered me because actually I thought it was a typo when it said 33 in the article. I thought, oh, this gal needs to know that there's a typo. That's a big number. And actually found out that was not a typo. It was 33 in that battalion. And that I could not deal with that. I couldn't let it go. And so, I was newly seated with the trust. And so I thought, gosh, we've got to figure this out. And that's where the conversation started happening around the fire on the beach. How can we address this? And, those conversations spawn a lot of different information, a lot of different perspectives. And so I thought it needs to be 3 parts. It needs to be, the part where the guy who just needs to talk, it just needs that peer-to-peer, experience where he can just talk it out. He lets that pressure and anxiety go, and he's good, right? He just needed the guys. There was that component, and that was that first S, the side-by-side. The O is the one-on-one anonymous therapy. And that's where that privacy, secrecy, let me get some help without anybody knowing comes into play. And that really kind of has been the most popular, I hate using that word, but the most used, let's do that, the most used element of SOS. And that is because I think we gained their trust. The folks in the regiment, whether it's a warrior, their spouse, or kiddos, they know they can ask for that help and no one's going to know about it. We have a system on the back end that does verify and vet and whatnot. And I won't get into those details, but we are not part of that vetting process. We really lean on the clinicians and whatnot to do that. And so even our staff does not know, the name. We just get that AIN number that becomes their name in essence on the invoicing. They are able to go onto our website. They're able to click on the O. It produces a unique identification code. That code is used as their name to any clinician that they take it to. There's a QR code that is attached to that that identification number. And so that clinician can download that QR code. It connects them with us. We do negotiating and onboarding with that. And then they are able to see that clinician for up to 12 sessions. If they need more than 12, they can go back, pull another number, and they can have an additional 12. And then at that point, if they decide, I need something more, I need more treatment, I'm realizing that I potentially have TBI or have PTSD, what have you, then we have the last S, which is sponsored treatments and services. We have lots of partners, great partnerships with some amazing organizations that, can provide anything from, alcohol abuse with Warrior's Heart. They're a wonderful partner to us. And Cameron mentioned some of the other names. I won't go down the list, but the most important piece is that we also have services. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a long treatment facility that you're taking part in. It can be a service that's provided. ART is something new that we're looking into. I think there's MERT. There are so many services out there. We're just getting started.
Yeah, and Jodi, so I appreciate you going back and kind of tying all of that into a ball from our sort of frenetic conversation about the program. We're all
all over the board,
super excited about it. But also, could you give us sort of a sense of the numbers? What's the magnitude of how many people are actually using this program?
Yeah, I'll give it to you in funding, because that's the easiest way to do it. And that's typically what people want to know is, how much are you spending on this? And so the very first year, it wasn't even a full year, it was May of 2022 is when we launched the program. It's May 19th to be exact. We literally had several people pull their first numbers. I think it was 12, that first month. We were so excited. We're like, oh my God, people are using it. And by the end of that first year, we had funded about $14,000 in therapy sessions. And we were like, this is amazing. We're doing such good work. Felt really good that people trusted us enough to use it. And I'll skip to this year, 2024. When we pulled the numbers at the end of the year, I actually called Cameron. I was like, we need to audit this. We need to make sure that this is right, because this is insane. And we looked at it. We had jumped to $417,000 at the end of 2024. And already this year, as of week before last, we had the numbers that we were already over $500,000 for this year. We still have a few months to go.
Yeah, months to go, right? So you're on pace. So you mentioned that, right? So 750,000, approaching potentially $1 million a year. How are you guys paying for this? How are you funding it? I mean, I know there's lots of big-hearted Americans out there.
We're lucky,
providing money. But can you sort of speak to your fundraising efforts and how you're raising funds to pay for these programs?
Yes. So our team is amazing. And I would say that it's in three parts. We host so many events. We pack them in as many as we can in a year. We pack those events in to raise money. Every event counts. On top of that, we do get large sums of money from grants. So we have quite a few different grantees that are just really generous. They love what we're doing. They love seeing the results of what their money is doing for the regiment. And then also we just partnered with Andy's fund. So Andy Marcazan, full circle. We're going back to, it'll make me cry. We're going back to that family. Oh, I get emotional because it's just so crazy how this works. But that article shook me. And to now have his mother say, I want to partner with you because I love what you're doing. It's a surreal moment. And so we've come full circle with this. They're going to help us raise some more money so that we can always say yes. We have to always be able to say yes. Sorry.
Super cool. All right. So now now that Jodi's made us all
I'm
cry.
Sorry.
I know.
I told myself I wasn't going to cry.
So now that
you can never say that she does not care.
I care.
She cares so much.
Absolutely. So now that we've moved through, we mentioned, your partner organizations. And one of the things I wanted to mention is this goes beyond, so we've sort of focused on mental wellness, but this goes, you guys are really talking about, as we do at the Heroes Wellness Collective, many facets of that. And So I know that you guys have recently partnered with an organization to do cancer screening and do some other things. Can you talk to some other partner organizations, potentially cancer screening, and what else are you guys looking at for wellness?
We are very excited to be partnering with SOTERIA. SOTERIA is allowing us the opportunity to offer up to special operators right now, Green Berets, the chance for a cancer risk assessment through saliva. It's the first of its kind. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a game changer, honestly. And what that kind of looks like is we're going to gather probably between 75 and 100 Green Berets at every single group. And we will collect saliva. It does come with some parameters. You can't work out for like up to 8 hours prior to the test. Of course, you can't drink. You have to be fasted and well rested. You have to have a good night's sleep. So all of those factors are very, very important for this test. You'll show up that morning. We'll collect the saliva from you. We'll feed you well after so that we know you're going to be nice and hungry. And then they agitate the saliva with a component, and then it gives you a positive or a negative. The idea is that our services will provide you with a roadmap. So if you are positive, then SOTERIA will give us the opportunity to do a blood test and then also a per novo scan. So you take those 3 items, you take them to your primary doctor. Simultaneously, SOTERIA is going to put you into their system, and you're either going to go on the East Coast or West Coast to a partner program there. So you'll have kind of a 3-pronged roadmap, if you will. And hopefully through those 3 prongs, you're going to get answers much more quickly than just depending on your primary care physician. And a lot of those costs are covered just through the sponsorship and through the partnership. So it's a real gift. We're very excited about it. There's going to be a lot more to come.
That's excellent, Jodi. Talking about cancer screening, and sort of as we're seeing in the special operator community, this increase in cancers, which brings it full circle to this term that we hear, not PTSD, but operator syndrome. Yeah. And the spectrum of things that go beyond some of the traditional things we see with PTSD and extends to physical ailments, the constant pain, persistent pain, and our central nervous system overactivation for prolonged periods of time. And so what are some of the other programs you guys are looking at to get after the spectrum of issues? What else are you guys looking at?
Yeah, I think honestly, we spoke a little bit about metalamoxy to begin with, and some of that program has really pivoted over the years as well. Kind of as we're talking, there's a lot of things that the soft community has dealt with or has become very common in that lifestyle. And so the thought process around metalamoxy now is those resources that are potentially brought in are speaking to, sleep deprivation or brain health or, what you're eating, how you're fueling your body, all of those, what stress does. So the goal of Moxie, as we're continuing to grow this as a part of our Beyond the Battlefield platform now too, is really kind of, let's create a safe space to hear and learn about these resources, navigate it with your spouse or significant other, maybe start some of those conversations at home. Like those things are struggles that, like as a spouse, you see in your significant other. So some of that can be like, hey, that struck a chord, that what that professional said about, prolonged, sleep disorders or, how your brain is struggling. Like I see some of those things. Are you seeing some of those things? And it kind of opens that door to conversation, I think, which is really a fantastic way to navigate, like, okay, what is out there? What, the community, there's a lot of information out there right now about all sorts of different therapies, what's going on, what's available, and which is wonderful, but also how do you apply it to what's happening with you, what's happening with your service member at home, and what's happening potentially with even your spouse and your kiddos. So we're really excited to kind of grow on that. And Jodi, I'll
jump in there.
You have extra stuff.
You make some good points, Cameron. Honestly, I'll jump in there. I want to say, first of all, Cameron and I are not doctors, just so that we know.
No,
you weren't shocked by that. But through Metal and Moxie, we have had the opportunity to have just some great speakers, presenters who are doctors and who have studied this for a number of years. So they're really experts on the topic in their field. And, some of the things that we've learned from them, one of the things that sticks out to me that really resonated with me is, PTSD is usually tied like to a specific trauma or like an event. It's acute, right? But like something happened and now your brain is it's like in an OODA loop and it's trying to process it. Whereas like the operational fatigue syndrome or operation syndrome is a little bit different. It's not just like one moment, it's years and years of high stakes, high pressure, loss, emotional suppression. It builds slowly and it's just like an accumulation of doing those really hard things for a long time, too long, with very little rest. And so it's going to show up in different ways: exhaustion, irritability, numbness, tingling, like name all the things that you guys talk about. It's pain, right? And the guys won't say like, hey, I'm having a flashback. I know that's like a whole Vietnam thing, but hey, I'm hurting, I'm traumatized. They're not going to say that. They're going to say things like, I don't feel like myself, or I'm hurting, like I'm physically hurting. And I think that's all kind of operational fatigue. But sometimes it means something else. Sometimes it could be cancer. It could be a disease. It could be something more. And sometimes just trying to find those answers to get that pain management under control leads to other things, right? It leads to cancers. It leads to those diseases. It leads to different kinds of syndromes. And so we've learned that over the years, cancer has become a really, unfortunately, a very common thing in SOF. And so we wanted to provide maybe an answer, a pathway, a roadmap for those guys who do find out that, hey, my pain was actually like a physical, there's something causing it. It's not just operational, fatigue. And that's where our initiative with SOTERIA came to be.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we're recognizing more and more, right? Is like if you tried to write down a description of everything you could do wrong to destroy your testosterone and serotonin,
that's right,
and everything else, that's exactly what we were doing, right? It's like no sleep, stay up all night.
That's right.
Caffeine, nicotine.
I wonder why I don't feel good. Yeah.
Yeah. Constant arousal of your central nervous system, right? And then it's like, hey, no wonder your body is taking a while to recover. And again, it goes back to one of the reasons I dislike PTSD was something you just mentioned, right? Is because that was an easy label that was available in the sort of diagnosis to like provide someone.
Oh my goodness, Fred, do I have a story for you on that?
That's a great segue, because that's one of the things I was like, tell me a story about like
you just triggered that with my own husband. And I won't name any names, but there were a few years where he's physically fit. He runs every single day, like he knows his body well. Like I'll give that. Special operators, they know their bodies well. They know when they're working well and when they're not, when there's something off. And he definitely knew there was something off, and he kept going to the doctors and they kept saying, oh, it's, pain comes in a lot of different ways. It shows itself in a lot of different ways. And he kept saying, no, there's something else. And I remember sitting in a doctor's office with him, and the doctor saying, we gave you a stress test. We put you on the treadmill. You smoke checked it. Like there's nothing wrong with you. I think it's just PTSD. And I won't tell you the explicitives that were launched at him, but he launched them and then we left. And I was like, I'm sorry. He's like, he's making my point. And I say that because, had we listened to that doctor, Marty would have thought that he just had PTSD and that was what it was, and we'd have to deal with it. Weeks later, we actually ended up finding out that he had blockage in his heart, and he ended up in heart surgery, emergency heart surgery, before heading out to the Hindu Kush. So it's like, sometimes there are true and factual things that are going on in one's body, and I'll give it to SOF operators. They usually know.
Yeah, but it's like, something's not right.
But you won't do anything about it.
Oh no, you also have the operating system is running over there. Shut up, body. You're
That's
fine.
right. No, that's very
Shut
true.
up, body. You are fine. Shut up. We got shit to do.
Keep moving.
I have no time for you to be doing whatever the hell you think.
That is
quit whining.
so true. So true.
So, that of course leads to some of the other problems that we have.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned personal thing. So from your guys, from being in this space and dealing with special forces operators and their families and their children, what are some of the hardest conversations that you've had that have either caused you to reevaluate a program or say, hey, you know what, we have a gap here, we need something else.
You're gonna make me cry again though.
I think I know exactly what you're going to talk about.
I think you should start. Let me get my.
I think what we learned was, and I'll give it to the ladies. Like, I feel like the spouses really rallied and help us a lot. As females, it feels like it's a safe space to talk. And what we found is like getting out and hosting some little mix and mingles for the spouses was so helpful. It was helpful for us as an organization because we could they helped us identify a lot of different gaps that they felt, but also it kind of created a safe space for those ladies to get together and realize they weren't alone while the guys are training up or deploying all of those things, but also they become their own little unit and tight-knit community as well. And I know one of our first spouse mix and mingle here in Southern Pines, we had a spouse that came and was very concerned about what was going on at home and what she might walk back into
from that night
when she went home that night. And, I think for us, it was such gold. I not that specific event, but like the being able to host something so simple, but really allow there to just be some genuine conversation about what can we do for you? This is what we think these are the programs that we have, the resources we have, but also, we don't know it all. So what do you guys need? What do you feel are opportunities? And in each one of the groups, the regiment as a whole is a very, uplifting and wonderful community, but each of the groups that we support is different. First group is very different from 7th group, which is very different from 5th, from 3rd, from 10th. And then, we support 1-1 and 110, which have their own set of circumstances being abroad. There's a lot. And those conversations have really sparked kind of like, okay, let's do some different programs for the kids, for the teens to reconnect them. A lot of the conversations came up after COVID too, like we had mentioned a little bit earlier as well, or ahead of this conversation, is trying to get back together and do things and get around one another again was a huge piece of the programs that we started up in 2021 as well. Just getting people out of the house and focused on this won't be this way forever. And it's hard to believe that it was 5 years ago now, but
I'm so glad it was.
That was yes, I'm so glad that that's behind us. But there was a lot of really great things that came out of that. And I know, that specific conversation, Jodi, is really your story to tell, but that's where my mind went.
That's
from
great.
That.
Yeah. No, I think the hardest conversation I have had was with a surviving mother. And it was just days after her son had taken his life. And I had to ask her if she would consider donating his brain to science so that we might be able to find some answers. And, those answers, they are potentially life-saving down the road. So really important conversation to have. But the timing of that conversation is kind of what made it so painful, because you're meeting someone, at their lowest point, you can feel like that their grief is really raw, and asking them the question just feels really wrong. And so you're asking them to make a decision that no parent ever wants to even think about. But what we've learned is that by not asking and not offering that option actually can maybe even make them hurt more or make them even angry, not knowing that they had that opportunity to try and help and find answers. So we've actually had families come back and just say, hey, why didn't anybody tell me that that was even a possibility? And that regret, I think, can be just as devastating. As a spouse, though, that conversation, it breaks your heart, right? Because, and then as a leader, even though I know it's necessary, it's really difficult. As a human being, though, I hope that somehow by asking the hardest questions at that pivotal time can create some kind of space for healing and hope, for someone else down the road. That's been the most difficult thing that I've had to do, and that was very recently.
Yeah.
And obviously, everyone listening can tell you guys are pouring your heart and soul into this, and so going back up, right, leading up as you guys are doing, right, down the grassroots, fixing the problems, but leading up. What have there been any policy changes that you see that you were like, okay, yeah, we were able to impact this policy, or are there policy changes that you still see like, hey, these are things that could be changed that would help the service members and their families, and things that you're advocating for?
Gosh, the things that stick out in my mind, I mean, these are little things, but big things, right? That could change and be so helpful. Number one, therapists being able to help across state lines for military. Just if we could get that one thing changed, it would just be so amazing, because we have a lot of therapists that are able to even provide services online. But if that service member is TDY and they're in a different state for whatever reason, they can't talk to them while they're gone, and that just seems ridiculous to me. It's the same clinician. That clinician is in their state, where they live. It should not be that difficult, and we're running into that time and time and time again. So I think that if any one policy, if I had to choose one, it would be that one.
Cameron, do you have a different one?
No, I mean, I totally echo that one. It would be huge. And I think too, for the 2 forward battalions, and there's more Green Berets overseas, but specifically those, Beyond the Battlefield is a huge resource, and it's hard to not talk to them about it, because how can they use it while they're forward all the time? So I think that would be fantastic. And I kind of wanted to jump in there too, Jodi, as far as suicide protocol afterwards too. So like when the guys are in, there are, casualty assistance officers that help support. Wow, there's a lot that is provided in help for the family, for the surviving family, while that service member is active. But once he is transitioned out of the military, retired out of the military, all of that changes. So just more information on that, but also, something that's a gap that we didn't realize was there, and just recently realized, unfortunately, that was there. And so we've put some things into place, and they're trying to come up with a good protocol to help provide that, at least to the Special Forces community. And I think the other struggle for us too is there are so many people in the community that we serve, and it's hard to hear that there are people in the community that don't know that we exist, especially having been around for as long as we have. But then you get beyond that active duty component, and there's so many more that still fall underneath the umbrella of support too. So it's kind of an uphill battle sometimes there's a lot of information, and how do you declutter some of the information to make sure that those people that really need the help and want the help can find it easily,
So one of the things that, we've sort of been talking about is wellness is larger than what we originally think. And I think that was one of the ways we got it wrong early, right? PTSD was the convenient label. As you heard, Jodi explain, her husband railed against it. Similar to my reaction, right? Like where I was like, hey, yeah, the F words want to start coming immediately, because because it's so much, and maybe, we didn't understand it either at the time, but now there's so much more study and so many more of us, right, that are looking into the problems like, okay, hey, we're going to solve our own problem. And, you have people that are now looking at, the gut biome and its ability to produce serotonin and how that impacts us, and how our crappy diet impact. So
we're getting smarter. We're getting smarter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We're seeing all of this other study go into that. What do you wish you could tell the general public about what mental wellness really looks like beyond the stigma of PTSD?
I think that, unfortunately, like civilians kind of bucket the military, and not in a good way. I think that if you don't know, you're on the outside and you're kind of looking like, oh, well, they deploy and they do this and they're all stressed. But if you really peel back the layers, there's a lot that all of us can identify with. Is definitely not to the same level by any means of being in a gunfight in the middle of the mountains alone in the middle of the night as compared to, being on Wall Street and fighting. But
Yeah.
when we talk like stress and we talk about, the factors of pressure and trying to get it right and trying to provide for your family and trying to take care of things, there are a lot more things that are kind of in common at the core of all of us. And I think just providing awareness, like these are people too, and you can't just bucket all of the things, all of the hurt and all of the struggle so simply. I think, the more we know, the more we talk, the more we share, the more we provide, and the more we can expose or bring to light the struggles that we all have, and opportunities on how to support each other every day through it. Some of the, I think, challenges here too are, for as many generations as there have been, we don't talk about a lot of things just as people, as a population. And then, now it's easier to talk about, psychedelics for sure, for instance, or easier to talk about, different personality disorders. It's easier to talk about all of these things. And I think that's hugely helpful for us as a civilization.
Yeah.
And it can't hurt to give faces and personalities to our donors, potential donors, the world, as, these are just not war fighting machines. These are people, and they have wonderful families, and they have stressors too.
I
Just humanize
I think
it.
I'd add in there, like, I wish that people knew that wounds, they aren't always loud, right? These guys they're experts at masking and pretending that they're not in pain, because they've been trying to do exactly that. It's often they're just exhausted, they're disconnected, they can become emotionally flat, and that builds slowly year after year. But also, just because somebody's high functioning doesn't mean that they're okay. You know what I mean? Because again, they're really good at masking, and being a lot of things. What is it? A jack of all trades, but a master of none, right? You guys are good at that. And so I think that just, that people knowing that, hey, these men, they may be operationally exceptional, but they also might be personally unraveling. Just check on them. Ask questions. How are you doing? How are you doing mentally? How are you doing emotionally? Because I think you might sometimes be surprised at the answer that you get if you ask a more pointed question.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
How do we get beyond thank you for your
Yeah.
service? Right? How do we? Because much like the the PTSD sort of bin or bucket, as Cameron was saying, sort of falls short of it's convenient, right? Because we can just everybody's that, and we can move on. Or hey, I've said thank you for your service, and right, and to many service members, it sort of rings hollow or falls flat if there's it's like, okay, great. One, how do you reply? And then two, it's like, so
It's awkward, right?
Yeah. Does anyone really want more? Does anyone really want to know the real story? Do they want to know, as as Cameron was pointing out, do they want to seek a human connection? Because as I think most of what we're talking about, right, all goes back to if we could keep people from isolating, both either being somewhere but still being isolated, right, because they don't want to connect, or physically isolating themselves. If we could, I think a lot of this goes back to that, right? If we connect, we can heal.
Right.
If we don't connect, we're not going to heal. So
true.
I think that's super important. So all right, guys, as we come to the end here, right, this is your time to stump the chump. What question should I have asked you guys? You're like, hey, I prepared for this question. Fred didn't ask me, but I think it's really important. So what question should I have asked, or what thing would you want to say didn't come up in one?
I think you covered everything. I mean, honestly,
No.
you're like, no, I didn't.
I think maybe could be a cool way if if this message resonates with you, there's so many ways to get involved. If you're part of the regiment and part of the community, like spreading the awareness of what the Special Forces Trust is, how we help, what programs are out there, attending events, reaching down and out to the community as far as, just awareness of what's available. I think Jodi and I, one of our biggest things is we don't like to say no. We hate that word. We are problem solvers. We like the challenge of trying to figure it out. And we could not do that alone either, though. We work through with some fantastic partners. There's a lot of really great organizations that are out there that we truly consider, wonderful partners with our organization. And so if we cannot say, yes, we got your 6 on that, we are going to try our best to get you to a partner organization who can help support it. There's nothing worse than leaving somebody who's taken the time and asked for help with like, oh, sorry, that's not in our wheelhouse, but good luck. That just to me sounds like, oh my God, just send them over the edge. And
that goes back to old popular movie quotes, right, from Princess Bride. Have fun storming the castle.
Yes, I love it. I would say, as far as support goes, right? Support can take many forms. My goodness, support from everyone matters. It takes a village to take care of this regiment and their families. If you're part of the military community, please share our programs, quietly, carefully, however it fits, just share them. Just let others know that they exist. If you're a civilian or a veteran who wants to help and it resonates with you, our programs resonate with you, then give. This program it's entirely donor funded, which means that any contribution or any gift goes directly towards providing therapies, as we've talked about today, for someone who maybe otherwise couldn't get it or didn't have the time to wait for it. And if you can't give and you can just be an advocate, we would appreciate that too. Or if you want to host a fundraiser, my goodness, we'll fit another one into the calendar, I promise you. Yeah. Invite us to speak, tell our story. The more people who know about us, the more we can reach. And it's just important to know that this isn't just a military issue. We know that it's a human issue, and we can always share with one another, our lessons learned, because it's going to take all of us to address the suicide and invisible wounds issue.
For a final question here, what's a program either that's out there on the edge that you're trying to develop, or something you wish you could touch?
Oh, I think I could name one. And it's not necessarily a program, Fred, more of a service provided. Cam and I have been really, really trying to be able to get brain scans for guys. Like if they're so expensive, right? But if we could find a way to provide that for any,
or partner with someone.
Yes, or partner with someone that I know having answers, for these guys is key, because I think sometimes the worry, and for their spouses, the worry of those things weigh heavy on them, and they deserve not to worry.
Yeah. Well, ladies, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting this morning, even though Jodi's been trying to make me cry and look,
I know.
Just making me look like a girly man on here, all teared up. And I appreciate you guys. I know what you do. I know firsthand how much you care, and it's been a pleasure talking about Special Forces Trust, and hopefully we can get the word out to some more people and get some more healing underway. But again, thanks for your time this morning.
We really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.